Are you dying on me, ma'am?
Sam Brooks whispered in disbelief as the spoon clattered onto the glossy boardroom table, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the deserted skyscraper. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and the last thing a janitor expected was to watch the almighty Eleanor Hart, the untouchable CEO whose signature shifted markets, slump forward like a marionette with its strings cut. Sam froze only a heartbeat, but Ruth's voice, his late wife's steady nurse's voice, rose inside his head. "You know the signs, Sam. Don't you dare ignore them." He rushed across the room, seeing the droop of Eleanor's mouth, her left arm sliding lifelessly across the table, the garbled nonsense spilling from lips that once commanded armies of lawyers. Stroke. He didn't need a degree to recognize it. He grabbed his phone, fingers steady, clarity that stunned the dispatcher. Sudden facial paralysis, slurred speech. As he gently positioned her on her that he used to hear sounded almost holy in the silent glass tower. "I've got you. Just breathe. Help is coming." Eleanor's eyes widened with terror, then flickered with the janitor might be her only anchor against the dark. By the time the paramedics stormed in, Sam had her stabilized, her story told in precise detail. Into the night, Sam returned to his mop and bucket as though nothing had happened. No applause. Saving a life mattered. Noticed. And you walked away in silence. The next morning, Sam Brooks trudged into the locker room with the weary gait of a man who had carried both a mop and a secret through the night. He expected the smell of bleach and sweat, but instead his eyes fell upon a neatly folded sheet of paper taped to his locker. "Formal warning," it declared in bold black letters. "Violation of security protocols. Signed." Sam stared at the words, the absurdity cutting deeper than the sting of any insult. 15 years of spotless service, not a single reprimand, and now punishment for saving a life. He folded the notice carefully, slipped it into his pocket, and whispered to himself, "Even the right thing can be wrong when done by the wrong man." As he pushed his cart down the polished marble corridors, he could not shake the gnawing question. How had Victor Hale known so quickly? The hospital would never breach confidentiality, and paramedics were sworn to discretion. The only explanation was unsettling. Someone within the building was monitoring Eleanor Hart far too closely, as though her health was a line item on a ledger. 2 hours later, Sam witnessed something that tightened the knot in his gut. Dr. Leonard Price, Eleanor's personal physician, arrived well past his usual schedule. Through the glass wall of the executive floor, Sam caught a glimpse of the doctor's pale, restless face as he stepped into Hale's office. The two men argued in hushed tones, their gestures sharp, their expressions laced with irritation and unease. It wasn't the reaction of professionals relieved by a patient's survival. No, these were men unsettled by her survival. Ruth's voice returned, softer now, but sharp as a scalpel. "Sammy, when sudden neurological events strike the powerful, never ask why now. Ask who profits if she doesn't recover." The words chilled him. Could it be possible that Eleanor's stroke wasn't merely stress-induced as it appeared? Could someone actually benefit from her incapacitation? The thought felt treasonous, yet it explained the odd puzzle pieces falling into place. The reprimand, the secrecy, the tension etched into the faces of Price and Hale. Sam tried to shake the notion, focusing on polishing brass railings and emptying trash bins, but the weight of suspicion followed him like a shadow. Every sound of rustling papers or clicking heels seemed to hint at secrets moving behind closed doors. For 15 years, he had been invisible, unnoticed by the powerful who occupied the upper floors. But now, invisibility was no longer just a curse, it was a weapon. He could observe without being observed, collect fragments others discarded, and piece together the truth that the powerful wanted buried. By noon, Sam passed the executive dining hall. Through the tin itself, pale but alive, speaking softly with an aide. Relief flickered across his face, but alongside it came an uneasy realization. She was recovering, yet she was surrounded by men who would her trust in the wrong people deliver her back into their hands? Sam gripped the mop handle tighter, feeling a surge of protective anger he hadn't expected. Ruth had been right all along. Medical knowledge wasn't just theory. It was power. And in the wrong hands, neglect could be weaponized as surely as poison. That night, as he scrubbed the silent marble lobby under the cold glow of fluorescent, about Price's pale face, about Hale's smug smile. Patterns were emerging, and Ruth's ghost seemed to stand beside him, urging him forward. There are no coincidences in medicine, she whispered in memory. When signs repeat, someone is pulling the strings. Sam knew then that the incident wasn't over. What had begun with a spoon clattering on a boardroom table was unraveling into something far larger, a hidden game of power, deceit, and survival. And though he was only a janitor, he realized he might be the only one who could see it clearly. The summons came in the afternoon, delivered not by email or intercom, but by a quiet assistant who found Sam in the service corridor with his mop. "Mr. Brooks," she said gently, "Ms. Hart would like to see you." For a moment, Sam thought he'd misheard. In 15 years, no one from the top floor had ever requested his presence for anything other than a spill on the carpet. Yet now, the woman whose face had graced Forbes covers wanted a private audience with the janitor who had knelt beside her at 3 in the morning. His heart pounded as he stepped into the executive suite, the air rich with leather and mahogany. Eleanor Hart sat behind her desk, pale but upright, her posture regal despite the weariness in her eyes. She gestured to the chair opposite. "Please sit." Her voice, though softer than usual, carried the authority of someone accustomed to command. Sam lowered himself carefully, hands clasped, unsure whether to avert his gaze. Eleanor studied him, the silence stretching between them until she spoke. "The doctors tell me your quick action saved my life. I wanted to thank you personally." Sam shook his head. "I only did what anyone with a little knowledge would do, ma'am." "But that's the thing," she pressed, leaning forward. "The paramedics said you described my symptoms with remarkable accuracy. They wondered if you had medical training. How does a janitor know the difference between panic and a stroke?" The question hit like a blow. Talking about Ruth still hurt, yet he saw in Eleanor's eyes something more than politeness, an earnest need for truth. He took a breath. "My wife, Ruth, was a neurology nurse for 20 years. Every dinner we shared, she made into a lesson. She believed knowledge shouldn't be locked away in hospitals, that ordinary people needed to recognize danger signs. She was killed in an accident 5 years ago." His voice wavered, but he steadied it. "Her lessons are the only reason I knew what to do." Eleanor's expression softened, genuine sympathy flickering across the hard edges of her face. "I'm sorry for your loss." She paused, then her eyes sharpened again. "Sam, may I ask you something unusual? In your opinion, your informed opinion, did what happened to me feel natural?" The room seemed to still. A janitor being asked for a medical opinion by a CEO was absurd, and yet Sam sensed her desperation. He chose his words carefully. "With respect, Ms. Hart, that's something you should discuss with your doctor." "I already did," she replied quickly, frustration seeping through her composure. "Dr. Price says it was stress. He prescribed sedatives. He told me to take a vacation." Sam felt an icy chill travel down his spine. Ruth's warnings rang loud and merciless. Competent doctors never dismiss sudden neurological events as mere stress. Prescribing sedatives after a stroke wasn't just careless, it bordered on criminal. He forced his face to remain neutral. "If you don't mind me asking, had you experienced any symptoms before? Headaches, dizziness, confusion?" Eleanor froze, then nodded reluctantly. "Persistent headaches, yes. Dizziness from time to time. Once I even forgot the name of a board member mid-meeting. Dr. Price said it was pressure, nothing more." Sam's jaw tightened, though he kept his voice steady. "Those are warning signs. Ruth always said strokes rarely come out of nowhere. They whisper before they shout. Silence stretched long and heavy between them, filled only by the distant hum of the city below. Eleanor's fingers tapped the desk, her mind clearly racing. Finally, she exhaled slowly, her eyes narrowing with something more dangerous than fear: suspicion. For the first time, Sam realized they were no longer janitor and CEO, two souls from different worlds. They were uneasy allies standing on the edge of a mystery. In that shared silence, a fragile bond formed, one built not on titles or power, but on truth, grief, and the chilling possibility that someone wanted Eleanor Hart gone. Sam returned to his nightly duties with a mind that no longer belonged to the quiet janitor sweeping away dust, but to a man awakened to shadows lurking in corridors that gleamed with false light. And as he moved silently through the marble floors of Hart & Co., his invisibility became his armor, the cloak that let him see without being seen, and what he saw in the following days filled him with dread. Dr. Leonard Price, once considered the trusted guardian of Eleanor Hart's health, arrived 3 times a week carrying the same brown leather briefcase that never seemed to leave his grip, and always his steps led him to the office of Victor Hale, whose smirk and watchful eyes betrayed the arrogance of a man who believed the world itself was his chessboard. And one evening, as Sam pushed his cleaning cart along the 41st floor, the door to Hale's office was left carelessly ajar, just enough for words to seep through like poison gas into Sam's ears, and those words made his blood freeze. "The tests still show progressive cardiovascular deterioration," Price whispered, "but I've kept the official reports within normal range, just as we agreed." And Hale's reply came low and satisfied: "Increase the dosage in the vitamins, 6 more months and she'll collapse for good." Sam gripped the handle of his cart to keep from staggering, his heart pounding with the certainty that Eleanor was not suffering from fate or stress, but from deliberate sabotage, a crime unfolding behind polished doors. And as he walked away, the echo of Ruth's voice pierced him again. The worst betrayal in medicine is not neglect, but harm disguised as care. Later that week, fate handed him an ally he had not expected. Diego Morales, the HVAC technician, younger, strong-shouldered, and carrying the quiet intensity of a veteran who had seen battlefields, approached Sam during a shift change with urgency in his eyes. "Man, you won't believe what I heard," he whispered, glancing around before continuing. "I was fixing a filter on the 42nd floor and overheard Hale on the phone, talking about buying huge amounts of stock before leadership changes he knew were coming." Sam felt the pieces align into a cruel picture. Hale and Price were not only endangering Eleanor's life, but preparing to profit from her downfall, orchestrating a conspiracy that reached from her bloodstream to the stock market, a slow-motion murder designed to crown Hale with power and fortune. That night, as Sam scrubbed conference room glass until it shone like water, his reflection stared back not as a janitor, but as a man standing on the edge of war, and he thought of Ruth teaching him to read symptoms at their kitchen table, her laughter echoing between lessons on blood flow and neurons, and he whispered into the empty room, "Ruth, they are killing her piece by piece, and I can't just clean floors while it happens." For 15 years, he had been the invisible man, unseen, unheard, unimportant in the eyes of executives. But now invisibility could be sharpened into a weapon more lethal than any gun. Because while Hale and Price schemed with arrogance, believing the janitor was ignorant, Sam knew he could slip through their fortress like air, gathering fragments of truth and turning them into a blade. The next day, he found Diego again, and with hushed voices over the hum of ventilation, they formed a pact. Diego would use his authorized access to the billing systems to install discrete recording devices, while Sam, with his encyclopedic knowledge of every schedule and routine, would guide the timing and cover their tracks. And as Diego unrolled blueprints of ducts and wiring, his combat-trained precision evident in every movement, Sam realized they were no longer just two workers in the shadows. They were soldiers of truth preparing for battle against men who thought themselves untouchable. Hale and Price had underestimated him, laughed about him even, calling him the lucky janitor who stumbled into saving Eleanor. But their arrogance would be their undoing, because Sam Brooks, armed with Ruth's legacy and Diego's skill, was ready to risk everything to expose them. And in that moment, he understood that the war had already begun, fought not with weapons or armies, but with silence, patience, and the ruthless clarity of a man who knew that the only way to honor his wife's lessons was to act when others turned away. The plan took shape not under bright lights, but in whispered conversations between mop strokes and the whirring of ventilation fans, and as Sam Brooks and Diego Morales mapped out their dangerous course, the weight of what they were about to attempt pressed heavily on them both. For this was no longer about suspicion, but about collecting the kind of evidence that could topple giants. And Diego, with his soldier's discipline, laid out the details as though briefing for a mission in hostile territory, showing Sam where tiny microphones could nest inside air vents and cameras, no larger than a fingernail could hide in lamp fixtures. And Sam, with 15 years of memorized routines, guided him on which hallways went unguarded at what hours, which offices were deserted during weekends, and which cleaners could be trusted not to wander into places they didn't belong. And together they crafted a rhythm of invisibility, one man vanishing into ducts with tools, the other covering his movements with the casual clatter of a mop bucket. When the first recording came back, the voices of Victor Hale and Dr. Leonard Price unspooled with sickening clarity, discussing dosage increases and the narrative of executive stress, even laughing about how the public would lap it up. And Sam listened with fists clenched, feeling Ruth's fury coursing through him as though she stood at his side, whispering that knowledge without action was complicity. The decision to act more boldly was sealed one late evening when Sam, pushing his cart past the executive boardroom, slipped an unmarked envelope onto Eleanor Hart's documents during a quarterly meeting, his heart hammering as he walked away without looking back. And inside the envelope were the words typed in plain black. The vitamins you're taking aren't vitamins. Check the bottle. Someone who cares. That night, he barely slept, imagining Eleanor's reaction, wondering if she would dismiss it as nonsense or see it as the lifeline it was meant to be. Meanwhile, Diego worked tirelessly, downloading hours of recordings, encrypting files, and passing copies through his network of veterans who knew how to handle evidence without drawing suspicion. And when they compared notes, the conspiracy grew clearer, its roots running deep into the financial lifeblood of the company. Hale's arrogance blinded him. He strutted through hallways with the confidence of a man who believed the world too stupid to question him, and Price, though nervous, continued to obey, convinced his medical authority shielded him from suspicion. Yet in their laughter and carelessness, in their dismissal of the lucky janitor, they had already signed their doom. Sam felt the fire of justice burn hotter with every word captured on tape, but beneath it pulsed a quiet fear, for he knew that if they were caught, if Hale even suspected their game, there would be no second chances. And he often lay awake at dawn staring at the ceiling, hearing Ruth's voice urging him forward, telling him that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act in spite of it. In the following days, Eleanor's subtle glances across meeting tables revealed she had read the note. For though she said nothing openly, Sam noticed the flicker of doubt in her eyes when she lifted the supplement bottle from her purse, and he felt a fragile thread of trust knitting between them, invisible yet strong, as if she too sensed that someone unseen was fighting for her survival. The trap was being set, the evidence mounting, and as Sam polished glass until it gleamed, he thought of the irony that his life of sweeping floors had trained him for this moment, to move unseen, to notice what others ignored, to leave no trace but the truth. And though he was only a janitor in the eyes of men like Hale, he was about to prove that invisibility could be the most dangerous weapon of all, capable of bringing empires to their knees. The confrontation began quietly, almost innocuously. Yet beneath the polished surface of Eleanor Hart's office, a storm brewed that neither Victor Hale nor Dr. Leonard Price could contain, for when Eleanor summoned her physician under the guise of a routine checkup, Sam Brooks and Diego Morales already had a directional microphone hidden inside the lamp on her desk, and a tiny camera disguised within the molding above the bookshelf. And as Sam listened from a maintenance closet 2 floors below with headphones pressed tight, his pulse raced in sync with Eleanor's poised voice as she asked, "How are my stress symptoms, doctor?" Her tone carried the weight of suspicion, sharpened by the anonymous note that had shaken her faith. And Price, sweating beneath his immaculate suit, replied too quickly, "You're improving steadily. Just continue the supplements and rest." But when Eleanor produced the envelope Sam had left and set it on the desk beside the bottle, asking with icy calm, "And what if I sent these for independent analysis?" The panic flickered across his face so clearly that Sam felt vindication surge like fire through his veins. Price stammered, insisting the warning was sabotage, the work of a disgruntled employee, yet Eleanor cut him off with the steel of a seasoned negotiator. "In 15 years as CEO, I've learned that when someone begs me not to check, that is precisely when I must." While upstairs Price faltered, Diego was in a van across the street transmitting files, dispatching hours of recordings, forged medical documents, and stock manipulation evidence to the FBI, the SEC, and a trusted journalist at the Tribune. And though fear gnawed at both men, there was no turning back. The avalanche had been set in motion. That afternoon, Sam entered Eleanor's office carrying a briefcase heavier than stone, filled with truth, and laid it on her desk with reverence, saying softly, "What I'm about to show you will change everything." For nearly an hour, he unveiled the horror. 92 hours of recordings of Hale and Price conspiring, 15 falsified medical reports doctored to mass deterioration, and a dossier of 341 suspicious transactions, each timed with her episodes. Compiled by Diego's veteran contacts with the precision of military intelligence. Eleanor's face transformed as she absorbed the betrayal, shock giving way to horror, horror hardening into fury. And when Sam finally whispered, "They thought I was just a janitor too ignorant to see beyond the symptoms. But you've been poisoned, Ms. Hart, piece by piece, and they are planning to finish you." She stared at him not as a servant, but as an ally, a man who had saved her 3 times. Once from death, once from ignorance, and now from conspiracy. The decision was swift and cold, forged in the fire of Eleanor's indignation. She would not simply survive, she would fight back with the full weight of her empire. Plans unfolded with military precision. A board meeting set as the stage, Price to be trapped with questions he could not answer, Hale summoned only to find law enforcement waiting in the wings. And all the while, Sam remained invisible, his presence felt not by sight, but by the evidence he had unearthed. As Eleanor rehearsed her poise, Sam stood by the window staring out at the city skyline. Knowing Ruth would be proud, knowing that justice was no longer a dream, but a blade they now held ready to strike. And though fear coiled in his stomach, it was tempered by a deeper conviction that the invisible man was about to make the powerful see him, and in their downfall discover that character, not status, was the true measure of worth. Saturday morning arrived with deceptive calm, the kind of stillness that precedes a storm, and when Victor Hale strode into the executive boardroom expecting to dominate an emergency meeting, his confident smile froze at the sight of federal agents standing beside Eleanor Hart, their badges gleaming under the chandelier. And before he could speak, she said with icy precision, "Victor, I'd like to introduce you to some people who are very interested in your extracurricular activities." And as Agent Ramirez read Hale his rights, panic distorted the face of a man who had once believed himself untouchable. At the same moment across town, Dr. Leonard Price was dragged from his office, still protesting as agents confiscated files he had tried to erase. But the evidence was overwhelming. Their arrogance crushed beneath the weight of Sam Brooks's invisibility turned into power. 2 days later, Eleanor stood before cameras at a press conference, her voice carrying across the nation as she declared Sam not merely a janitor, but the new director of corporate safety and integrity, praising his courage in unveiling the Ruth Brooks Scholarship to train young doctors from working-class families. And as Sam stood silently beside her, the applause washing over him, he thought of Ruth and whispered in his heart, "We did it." Carter and Price would face years behind bars, stripped of wealth and reputation, while Sam, once invisible, became a symbol of justice, proof that knowledge and character mattered more than titles or degrees. Yet for him, the true victory was not the office he now held or the respect he finally earned, but the letters he began receiving from workers across the country, men and women who had been dismissed, underestimated, or silenced, telling him that his story gave them courage to speak, to act, to believe in their worth. And as Sam sat in his new office overlooking the city, he touched Ruth's photo on his desk and smiled, knowing she had guided every step. And you, if you were in Sam's shoes, would you risk everything to expose the truth? Even if the world thought you were nobody? Tell me below, would you have stayed invisible or would you have stepped into the light?